Turks that same year in head-on battle, in which over 3,000 British soldiers were killed. The capture of Aqaba was the turning point in Britain's eventual defeat of the Turks in the Middle East. The greatest power you can have in any conflict is the ability to confuse your opponent about your intentions. Confused opponents do not know how or where to defend themselves. Hit them with a surprise attack, and they are pushed off balance and fall. To accomplish this, you must maneuver with just one purpose: to keep them guessing. You get them to chase you in circles. You say the opposite of what you mean to do. You threaten one area while shooting for another. You create maximum disorder. But to pull this off, you need room to maneuver. If you crowd yourself with alliances that force your hand, if you take positions that box you into corners, if you commit yourself to defending one fixed position, you lose the power of maneuver. You become predictable. You are like the British and the Turks, moving in straight lines in defined areas, ignoring the vast desert around you. People who fight this way deserve the bloody battles they face. 4. Early in 1937, Harry Cohn, longtime chief of Columbia Pictures, faced a crisis. His most successful director, Frank Capra, had just left the studio and profits were down. Cohn needed a hit and a replacement for Capra, and he believed he had found the right formula with a comedy called The Awful Truth and a 39-year-old director named Leo McCarey. McCarey had directed Duck Soup with the Marx Brothers and Ruggles of Red Gap with Charles Laughton, two different but successful comedies. Cohn offered McCarey The Awful Truth. McCarey said he did not like the script, but he would do the picture anyway for $100,000, a huge sum in 1937 dollars. Cohn, who ran Columbia like Mussolini, in fact, he kept a picture of Il Duce in his office, exploded at the price. McCarey got up to go, but as he was leaving, he noticed the producer's office piano. McCarey was a frustrated songwriter. He sat down and began to play a show tune. Cohn had a weakness for such music, and he was entranced. "Anybody who likes music like that has got to be a talented man," he said. "I'll pay that exorbitant fee. Report to work tomorrow." In the days to come, Cohn was going to regret his decision. 3 stars were cast for The Awful Truth: Cary Grant, Irene Dunne, and Ralph Bellamy. All had problems with their roles as written in the script. None of them wanted to do the picture, and as time went by, their unhappiness only grew. Revisions to the script began to come in. McCarey had apparently junked the original and was starting over, but his creative process was peculiar. He would sit in a parked car on Hollywood Boulevard with the screenwriter Vigna Del Mar and verbally improvise scenes with her. Later, when shooting began, he would walk on the beach and scribble the next day's setups on torn pieces of brown paper. His style of directing was equally upsetting to the actors. One day, for instance, he asked Dunne whether she played the piano and Bellamy whether he could sing. Both answered not very well, but McCarey's next step was to have Dunne play Home on the Range as best she could, while Bellamy sang off-key. The actors did not enjoy this rather humiliating exercise, but McCarey was delighted and filmed the entire song. None of this was in the script, but all of it ended up in the film. Sometimes the actors would wait on set while McCarey would mess around on the piano, then suddenly come up with an idea for what to shoot that day. One morning, Cohn visited the set and witnessed this odd process. "I hired you to make a great comedy so I could show up Frank Capra. The only one who's going to laugh at this picture is Capra," he exclaimed. Cohn was disgusted and basically wrote the whole thing off. His irritation grew daily, but he was contractually bound to pay Dunne $40,000 for the film, whether it was shot or not. He could not fire McCarey at this point without creating greater problems, nor could he have him go back to the original script, since McCarey had already begun shooting and only he seemed to know where the film was going. Yet, as the days went on, the actors began to see some method in McCary's madness. He would shoot them in long takes, in which much of their work was only loosely guided. The scenes had spontaneity and liveliness. Casual as he seemed, he knew what he wanted, and would reshoot the simplest shot if the look on the actors' faces was not loving enough. His shoot days were short and to the point. One day, after many days' absence, Cohn showed up on set to find McCary serving drinks to the cast. Cohn was about to explode when the director told him they were drinking to celebrate. They had just finished shooting. Cohn was shocked and delighted. McCary had finished ahead of schedule and $200,000 under budget. Then, to his surprise as well, the picture came together in the editing room like a strange puzzle. It was good, very good. Test audiences roared with laughter. Premiering in 1937, The Awful Truth was a complete success and won McCary the Best Director Oscar. Cohn had found his new Frank Capra. Unfortunately, McCary had seen his boss's dictatorial tendencies all too clearly, and though Cohn made lucrative offers, McCary never worked for Columbia again. Interpretation. Leo McCary, one of the great directors of Hollywood's golden era, was essentially a frustrated composer and songwriter. He had gone to work directing slapstick comedies — McCary was the man who paired Laurel with Hardy — only because he was unable to make a living in music. The Awful Truth is considered one of the greatest screwball comedies ever made, and both its style and the way McCary worked on it stemmed from his musical instincts. He composed the film in his head in just the same loose yet logical way that he would tinker with a tune on the piano. To create a film this way required two things: room to maneuver and the ability to channel chaos and confusion into the creative process. McCary kept his distance from Cohn, the actors, the screenwriters, in fact, everyone, as best he could. He would not let himself be boxed in by anyone's idea of how to shoot a film. Given room to maneuver, he could improvise, experiment, move fluidly in different directions in any scene, yet keep everything perfectly controlled. He always seemed to know what he wanted and what worked. And because filmmaking this way made every day a fresh challenge, the actors had to respond with their own energy, rather than simply regurgitating words from a script. McCary allowed room for chance and the random events of life to enter his creative scheme without being overwhelmed by chaos. The scene he was inspired to create when he learned of Dunn's and Bellamy's lack of musical skill, for example, seems unrehearsed and lifelike because it really was. Had it been scripted, it would have been far less funny. Directing a film, or any project, artistic or professional or scientific, is like fighting a war. There's a certain strategic logic to the way you attack a problem, shape your work, deal with friction, and the discrepancy between what you want and what you get. Directors or artists often start out with great ideas, but in the planning create such a straitjacket for themselves, such a rigid script to follow and form to fit in, that the process loses all joy. There's nothing left to explore in the creation itself, and the end result seems lifeless and disappointing. On the other side, artists may start with a loose idea that seems promising, but they are too lazy or undisciplined to give it shape and form. They create so much space and confusion that in the end, nothing coheres. The solution is to plan, to have a clear idea what you want, then put yourself in open space and give yourself options to work with. You direct the situation, but leave room for unexpected opportunities and random events. Both generals and artists can be judged by the way they handle chaos and confusion, embracing it, yet guiding it for their own purposes. 5. One day in the Japan of the 1540s, in a ferry boat crowded with farmers, merchants, and craftsmen, a young samurai regaled all who would listen with tales of his great victories as a swordsman, wielding his 3-foot-long sword as he spoke to demonstrate his prowess. The other passengers were a little afraid of this athletic young man, so they feigned interest in his stories to avoid trouble. But one older man sat to the side, ignoring the young boaster. The older man was obviously a samurai himself. He carried 2 swords, but no one knew that this was in fact Tsukahara Bokuden, perhaps the greatest swordsman of his time. He was in his 50s by then and liked to travel alone and incognito. Bokuden sat with his eyes closed, seemingly deep in meditation. His stillness and silence began to annoy the young samurai, who finally called out, "Don't you like this kind of talk? You don't even know how to wield a sword, old man, do you?" "I most certainly do," answered Bokuden. "My way, however, is not to wield my sword in such inconsequential circumstances as these." "A way of using a sword that doesn't use a sword?" said the young samurai. "Don't talk gibberish. What is your school of fighting called?"